All right, so now we're going to talk about in general the issue of firm decision making in non-competitive markets. So what do I mean by that? So I've been making an assumption of perfectly competitive markets. I'm going to put that on the right, competitive markets. And in competitive markets, we make certain assumptions. One is that it's homogeneous goods. Another is many buyers and sellers. So all participants are price takers. No one individual company or buyer or seller can affect the market. So the idea there is if you're buying a product and you don't get a good deal from somebody, you can, there are a lot of people for you to ask, lots of options, very competitive from the seller's point of view, but also, from the buyer's point of view, but also the sellers. That means if I'm a seller and I am offering the market price and you somehow want to try to negotiate, I don't have to have you as my customer. I have other people who are willing to buy. Okay, so we have the homogeneous goods, many buyers and sellers. So we have a price taker assumption. They cannot control or affect the price. And free entry and exit. This is obviously not a assumption that goes everywhere. And in particular, we have the opposite case, which is the monopoly case. So it's a monopoly. You actually have one seller of the product. Now we have to think about whether a particular company is really a monopoly if they're the only ones selling a very specific type of product, but the need that they're filling, people really don't see this as a product that doesn't have any competition. So you are selling a product and there's really, as far as the consumers are concerned, they don't see any competition. So there are barriers to entry. I'm going to talk about one in particular: patents, copyright, or what do we call it now? Patent, copyright, or I'm forgetting the word, which will come to me. This is what happens when you have a vaccine and you limit who can sell. It's not called a copyright. I'll come back, but that's the example that we want to talk about. But intellectual, some kind of intellectual property right that restricts who can sell what you've created. Okay. And it seems like something we would want. We'll talk about that. Okay. So it's basically a license that you're the only one can sell, and that's the only thing stopping other people from selling it. High fixed costs, right? So imagine if you want to create a wind farm, that's a lot of money. If you want to create a car company, if you want to create an airline company, if you wanted to sell water in terms of via pipes or gas or electricity to people in an area, you would have to put in a whole lot of infrastructure, and the high fixed cost is a barrier to entry. Fixed costs itself are a barrier to entry. Competitive markets, they're low and people can really overcome them very easily. High fixed costs, such that in fact you only want one, sometimes leads to legal restrictions on the number of sellers. All right. So I should just let's put the B first. Legally, the government only licenses one seller, right? But high fixed costs, sometimes the government is only making that license in because you don't want to replicate those high fixed costs. So in the case of selling gas, say, to the citizens of New York City, we don't want two gas companies. We don't want two sets of pipelines. We don't want, for like the cable companies, two sets of cables. The road is being dug up. So we don't want to, as a society, incur those costs. So just to note, one of the solutions that the government has come up with to this monopoly problems, like you have an oligopoly, You have a huge infrastructure that you have to lay out to be, say, a phone company or communications company like Verizon. And so Jamaica has also done this. What the government has done is allowed, or actually even forced, some of these companies to sell in bulk to another company, in which case that other company can then resell the service, but using the same infrastructure, okay? And so we have these very wide range of types of market structures in terms of how many sellers we have. We have duopolies. That means we just have two companies, and then we have oligopolies. And we had a board on this. Oligopolies. And we have monopolistically competitive. So what are some of the differences? Well, the difference is really in the degree of competition. You have one firm, you have two firms, several firms, the oligopolies, and the monopolistic community, you have many firms, and it's closer in terms of the entry and exit to competitive markets than monopoly. So lower fixed costs, but the products not like competition, but non-homogeneous products. What does that mean? It means that we can see differences. So examples of this would be like gas. The actual gas stations that you go to, many are independently owned. The key foods are independently owned. The gas stations do not all have the same price. Okay, so there are a little bit of differences. So there's some amount that you can mark up, but it can't go wildly. If any place on Staten Island had $10 for gas, I'm pretty sure nobody would actually go for that gas. But if it's like a few cents higher, then people don't make a big switch, right? One of the issues with oligopolies and duopolies is there is an issue of collusion. Right? And this is the deal with one of the most famous oligopolies in the world is the OPEC cartel, or the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. So there are very few oil companies. Again, you need huge fixed costs to be able to drill for oil. And so OPEC is a legal cartel, but in the US, you cannot. You're in an oligopoly market structure. You have very few players. It's very easy to collude. What do I mean by collude? You can act like a monopolist. You can literally get together, set the price. You know that you're each going to sell a little bit less, but your profits are going to be higher if you can essentially, the customer has nobody else to go to have a lower price. So what does that do? And I'm going to talk about this generally, and then we'll do a specific numeric example, right? And I'm going to talk about the cases where we really have legal restrictions, okay? And so what happens is you have some kind of intellectual property, and let's think about this as the textbook. The textbook, somebody goes and sits down, writes the textbook, they put it up online, right? Or you could print out a hard copy. And let's assume that you can print the hard copy and the cost of printing is just $10 per book, right? So here's our usual framework. That's the cost. But for your specific textbook, right? Let me use my orange. Here's the demand. Right, so it's downward sloping. We know from class, if the price is lowered, more students are willing and able to buy the book. Now, from a social point of view, if the value, remember these students have the marginal private benefit, we have the value to the society of the book, right? I do believe that the books are very, very important. They give you a chance to read stuff, and it goes much deeper than I can go to in the class. It covers much more. I simply cannot talk about in the time allocated for the class and the semester, every single thing in the book. It's really encourage you to read it. Let's go now. This is my favorite color, purple. If the benefit to society is greater than the cost, all the way up to here. So this is the socially optimal amount. So the total surplus at the social optimal amount is here. the book's already been written. It's advantageous to society, knowledge accumulation, creation, to actually have more, everybody who is willing to pay for just the printing of the textbook to get it. So that's a total surplus at QSO. But as we saw before in an earlier video, look back on the general discussion board to see what that is, but let's use the screen. The marginal revenue when the demand curve slopes downward, when we are in a non-perfectly competitive market, it's below, it's below the demand curve. Specifically, the marginal revenue, if we assume a linear demand, I'm not going to go into the details of that, but the marginal revenue, the additions to revenue are going to fall faster than the demand curve when you have a downward sloping pattern. What does that mean? Well, when you have to sell an additional unit, you have to lower your price, but we are assuming here no price discrimination. So you lower price on all units. And what that means is people who are willing to pay a higher price, they get that consumer surplus. You get the additional money from additional units of sales, but you lose money on those customers with high value for your product. And so when we put that all together, the marginal revenue, the additional benefit you would get from selling another unit, it's not as high as the price, which means that the marginal benefit, I should say the marginal private benefit to the consumers, that's what that is. But the marginal benefit to the firm is different, and that's a big deal, right? The firm is going to make a decision. The marginal revenue is the benefit to the firm from selling one more unit of the product. And that's different from what the benefit is to society or the consumer. It's particularly bad, of course, if there's a positive externality. So the firm is looking at the benefit to the firm, that's the green line, the marginal revenue, and the marginal cost. So let's see, what's the firm going to choose? Well, the firm is going to choose to produce, as long as that green line is above the red marginal cost. So this is the Q for the firm. And in particular, I'm going to put QM for monopoly. Right. But here's kind of the kicker of this. We've assumed a certain kind of marginal cost. We've assumed a constant marginal cost. Printing a textbooks, a lot of there's a lot of printing on demand now. When you go when you sell through Amazon, I'm being told by somebody who does this, you order the book online and they print on demand. So it's literally just the cost of printing, and that's pretty much kind of a standard thing. All right, so what's the price they're going to charge? The marginal cost is $10 here, but you go up when you are the only person selling, or when you face a downward selling demand curve. That marginal revenue is below the demand curve, and we can the marginal cost cuts the marginal revenue somewhere below the demand curve. So you're going to go up to the demand curve from the quantity that is maximizing profits, which is where marginal revenue is equal to marginal costs. I'm going to go up and see, well, what will people pay for this? Well, in fact, something higher than the cost. And we call the ability to mark up, monopoly power, market power. But what does this mean for our total surplus? Well, the total surplus stops at the quantity that's actually being bought and sold, and so it's going to just be here. And so let's put this in red. And so we have an area of potential total surplus. This is value that you, the students, could say get from a textbook. And this is known as the deadweight loss of the monopoly. Okay. And so the idea is that when you charge a higher price for a product, you remove access. People can't afford it, don't get it. So this product becomes kind of exclusive to people who can pay for it. But what that does for a society, you talk about access to products and the value in consumer services, it lowers wealth. That money that they save could be used to buy other things. And what we're seeing here is that the value of that society is greater than the cost. And so resources should be allocated to this. What's the problem here is that the monopolist is not interested in the good of society. They are interested in maximizing profits. Okay. So a couple of notes on the impact of different policies. What will a subsidy do? Subsidies, as we know, it's like you can kind of tack on that money to the demand curve as what will end up possibly being paid. That is going to shift that marginal revenue curve to the right also. And that's once again going to increase the queue. It's going to increase the allocation of resources to this product. And that's a good thing, right? The cost is going to be worth it if we subsidize a product and get us closer to QSO. The price control is an interesting one in the face of non-competitive markets. A price control that places a price ceiling between the monopoly's chosen price and the marginal costs will in fact increase output. What it will do is it will lower the incentive for a company to cut back on production in order to increase profits by literally claiming that much higher value from its high-paying consumers. Last not least, I want to talk about taxes. Taxes in this situation, like the competitive market, again, depending on the size of the tax, you're going to see a different quantity response, but the tax is going to be it's almost like you could subtract it from demand. And so that's going to lower the quantity allocated. A minimum price in the case of a monopoly does not really make sense because they set their own price. So you don't need to, as the government, try to set the price for a monopolist in order to get them to have support for their product. In terms of making the kind of income, sort of think of like some kind of living wage or profits or something. And so we're going to stop here and then we're going to do an actual example. I mean, a numeric